The sun hung high over the Marine Corps base, as the familiar strains of the Gomer Pyle United States Marine Corps theme song seemed to echo through the air. This was a story starring Jim Nabors as the ever-cheerful Gomer Pyle and Frank Sutton as the perennially frustrated Sergeant Carter. In the quiet corner of the duty hut, a card game was in full swing. Sergeant Hacker leaned back, looking at his fellow officer with a smirk. He told Vince to take it easy and suggested that he should just sleep on it tonight. Hacker assured him that they would talk about it again tomorrow and that everything would work out all right. Sergeant Carter, however, was not in a patient mood. He asked Hacker if he was the chaplain now, wondering why he spent 10 minutes with that kid. Hacker shrugged, explaining that whenever his boys had a problem, they came running to him because he guessed he must be their father image. Carter scoffed, telling him to just play the cards and calling him Pop. Hacker asked if Vince had looked at his cards, which Carter denied immediately, asking if he would ever do such a thing. Carter called for a new deal, but Hacker protested, saying he had a good hand and mentioning the jack of spades he had thrown. Carter insisted on the new deal anyway. Hacker sighed, saying he guessed it was all part of being a sergeant. When Carter asked what part he meant, Hacker explained it was having to wet nurse these guys and listen to their troubles. He mentioned that there was a certain rapport between him and his men, something he claimed Carter lacked. Carter grew defensive, asserting that he had rapport with his men just as well as Hacker did. Hacker questioned if Carter's men ever confided in him or came to him with their problems. Carter argued that being a Dear Abby had nothing to do with rapport, but Hacker insisted he knew all the angles and could give them the benefit of his experience. When Hacker won the hand with Jen, Carter had finally had enough and ordered everyone to hit the road and move it. Outside, Carter barked at his men, calling them creeping knuckleheads and telling them to move. He stood before the platoon and announced that before they started today's details, he wanted to prove something. He wanted to prove that he had rapport with all his men. He asked who had a problem they would like to discuss with him. He encouraged anyone who wanted to get something off their chest to speak up. He called them knuckleheads and told them to get off the dime. He pleaded for someone to discuss a problem with someone older, wiser, and patient. When no one spoke, Hacker whispered that those knuckleheads would not understand if it hit them on the mouth. Carter ignored him and turned to Slater, asking if he liked him. Slater said sure, but when Carter asked how much, the answer was not convincing. Suddenly, Gomer Pyle spoke up. He told the sergeant that he had a problem that was personal, which was why he did not speak up outside. Carter was delighted and invited him into the hut. Pyle admitted he was embarrassed and had never discussed it with anyone before. Carter asked Slater to excuse them and then turned his attention to Gomer. Pyle explained that he wanted to talk it over with someone wiser, older, and more patient, just as Carter had described himself. Gomer began to explain that during his last dental checkup, the dentist said he had an underbite. He said it was not a bad one and could be corrected. He explained that he needed a retainer, which was a steel wire that sits in the mouth and is held in place by a strap around the neck. The good part was that he would only have to wear it at night, but he was not sure if he wanted to go to all that bother. He asked what the sergeant thought. Carter's patience snapped instantly. He told Pyle to get out and shouted that Pyle had a lot of nerve bothering him with a stupid underbite. Despite Gomer's protests, Carter kicked him out, shouting that he was a sergeant, not a dentist. Hacker watched this with a grin, noting that Carter had no patience and could not help blowing his top. Carter defended himself, saying the discussion about the underbite was stupid. Hacker challenged him, saying Carter could not go one day without blowing his stack. Carter claimed he was in full and complete control of himself. Hacker proposed a bet of $10, but Carter raised it to $50. They agreed on a 24-hour period. Hacker warned that he and his boys would be watching every minute for an explosion. Carter felt confident, thinking it was the easiest money he ever made, while Slater expressed doubt that 24 hours was a long time. Later, Hacker and Corporal Jameson ran into Gomer. Hacker acted friendly and asked what Gomer and Carter had been discussing. Gomer was hesitant but eventually explained the whole situation about the underbite and how Carter was not too interested. Hacker lied to Gomer, saying that Carter actually missed counseling with him and that Gomer had probably just interrupted his train of thought. He encouraged Gomer to try talking to Carter again, calling him an understanding man. Hacker chuckled to Jameson, thinking this would be the fastest payoff in history. Gomer approached Carter again, asking if he was on a train of thought. Carter tried to stay calm as Gomer went into great detail about how the underbite made him the last one to finish an ear of corn. Carter, through gritted teeth, told Pyle to just do it and get the retainer. Gomer thanked him profusely and left. Hacker was surprised Carter did not fall for it, but he decided to let nature take its course. Throughout the day, Carter struggled to maintain his composure. Even when Gomer accidentally hit Carter with a sword or nearly spilled paint on him, Carter forced himself to stay calm, despite the visible cramps from holding in his anger. Hacker realized nature needed a little help. He found Gomer and told him that Carter's problem was mental, not physical. He suggested that Carter was keeping everything inside and needed a jolt. Hacker proposed a plan where Gomer would break Carter's most prized possession, his sword from the Incheon landing. Hacker promised he would substitute the real sword with a cheap fake so no real damage would be done. Gomer was hesitant but agreed because he wanted to help his sergeant. 30 minutes later, Gomer walked into the duty hut. He picked up the sword and, in front of a horrified Carter, snapped it in two. Carter was stunned into silence. Gomer encouraged him to let it out, thinking it would cure his stomach pains. When Carter finally spoke, Gomer explained that Hacker had suggested it to help him let off steam and that the sword was just a fake substitute. Carter realized the truth.
Hacker hat lied.
There was no substitute. The sword Gomer broke was the real one. Carter explained the bet to Gomer and told him that Hacker had used him to sabotage the deal. Gomer felt terrible, but Carter suddenly started laughing. He realized that by not losing his temper when the sword broke, he had won the bet. He told Gomer he had won it in a card game anyway and could get it fixed with the $50 from the bet. As the 24-hour mark approached, Carter was smug. Slater entered and handed Carter a piece of paper, explaining that Hacker had conceded and paid off the bet with an IOU. Carter's face turned red. He exploded in rage, screaming at Slater for being a knucklehead and accepting a worthless piece of paper. He ordered Slater out of the hut, shouting at the top of his lungs. At that exact moment, Hacker walked in, pointing at his watch. Carter had lost the bet with only 5 minutes to go. Hacker collected the $50 from Carter, telling him to look at it as an education from a pro. However, Gomer noticed something. He asked Hacker if he would like to take care of the IOU he had given to Slater now that he had the cash. Hacker tried to brush it off, but Carter realized that Hacker now owed him $50 based on that very paper. The two sergeants stared at each other, realizing they had ended up exactly where they started. Gomer smiled, noting that nobody won and nobody lost, which was the best kind of gambling. He then innocently asked Hacker if he was having stomach pains and suggested it might be mental. The story ended with the realization that in the world of the Marine Corps, things often have a way of balancing themselves out, even if it involves a broken sword and a few lost bets. The values of patience and honesty were learned the hard way, all while maintaining the light-hearted spirit of the base.